The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace, but its warmth could not reach the cold hearts of those who walked its halls. Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of the throne room, watching the gardens where he and Princess Isabella had once laughed together as children. Now, 25 years later, those same gardens would witness the most painful farewell of their lives. The kingdom of Eldoria had been their sanctuary, a place where royal duties felt lighter because they shared them together. Alexander, the crown prince with his kind eyes and gentle nature, had always been the steady one. Isabella, younger by 3 years, brought joy and laughter to every corner of the palace with her bright spirit and caring heart. Together, they had been the perfect royal siblings, beloved by their people and devoted to each other. But today, everything would change forever. The heavy wooden doors of the throne room opened with a slow creak, and Isabella entered wearing a simple blue dress instead of her usual royal gowns. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a modest bun, and her green eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were now red from crying. She carried only a small leather bag, everything she would take with her to her new life. Alexander turned from the window, his heart breaking at the sight of his sister. The political marriage that would take her to the distant kingdom of Valeria had been arranged months ago, but neither of them had truly believed this day would come. King Harold, their father, had insisted it was necessary to secure peace between the two kingdoms. Queen Margaret, their mother, had tried to find another way, but the Council of Nobles had made their decision final. The siblings walked toward each other slowly, as if moving through water. When they met in the center of the room, beneath the great crystal chandelier that had witnessed so many royal celebrations, they simply held each other without speaking. Isabella's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and Alexander felt tears he had been holding back for weeks finally begin to fall. "I always thought we would grow old here together," Isabella whispered against his shoulder. "I thought our children would play in these same gardens where we played." Alexander pulled back to look at his sister's face, memorizing every detail. "You will always be the princess of Eldoria, no matter where you go. This palace, this kingdom, our people, they will always be yours." Through the windows, they could see the royal carriage being prepared in the courtyard. Black horses stamped their feet impatiently, and servants loaded Isabella's belongings. The sight made everything feel terrifyingly real. Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver locket that had belonged to their grandmother. Inside was a tiny painting of the two of them as children, sitting under the old oak tree in the palace gardens. "I want you to keep this," she said, pressing it into Alexander's hands. "So you remember that no matter how far apart we are still connected." Alexander's voice cracked as he spoke. "How can I rule this kingdom without you beside me? You have been my strength, my advisor, my dearest friend. The people love you as much as they love me. You will rule with the same kindness and wisdom you have always shown," Isabella replied, though her voice trembled. "And I will think of Eldoria every day. I will make sure that the kingdom of Valeria knows how wonderful our people are, how beautiful our land is." The sound of footsteps in the hallway told them their time was running out. Soon, the royal escort would arrive to take Isabella to her new home, to her new husband whom she had never met, to a life that felt like a dream from which she could not wake. As they stood together in the throne room where they had played as children, where they had learned the responsibilities of royalty, where they had shared so many memories, both knew that their childhood was truly ending. The palace that had always been filled with their laughter would soon echo with silence. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, but for Prince Alexander and Princess Isabella, the light seemed to be fading. Their tearful goodbye was beginning, and everyone in the palace could feel their heartbreak like a heavy weight in the air. The royal family gathered in the blue salon for their final breakfast together. King Harold sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his usually commanding presence diminished by the sadness in his eyes. Queen Margaret barely touched her food, instead watching her daughter with the desperate attention of someone trying to memorize every moment. Isabella tried to eat normally, but every bite felt like swallowing stones. The servants moved quietly around the room, their usual cheerful chatter replaced by respectful silence. Even Mrs. Thornberry, the head cook who had known Isabella since birth, had tears streaming down her cheeks as she served the princess's favorite strawberry jam. "Tell me about Prince Marcus," Isabella said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. She needed to know something, anything, about the man who would become her husband. What is he like as a person, not just as a prince? King Harold set down his teacup carefully. He is said to be intelligent and fair. The reports from our ambassadors describe him as a man who cares deeply for his people. He enjoys reading and horseback riding, much like you do. But does he laugh? Isabella pressed. Does he sing? Does he notice when the flowers bloom in spring or when the first snow falls in winter? Queen Margaret reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. My dear, sometimes love grows slowly. Your father and I barely knew each other when we married. But look at us now. Isabella nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. She had always dreamed of marrying for love, like in the fairy tales her grandmother used to tell. The idea of learning to love a stranger felt overwhelming. Alexander had been quiet throughout breakfast, pushing his eggs around his plate without eating. Finally, he spoke. I have written letters for you, he said quietly. One for every month of your first year in Valeria. Mrs. Thornberry will make sure they reach you. The simple kindness of this gesture broke Isabella's composure completely. She buried her face in her napkin and sobbed, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Queen Margaret quickly moved to sit beside her daughter, wrapping her in a warm embrace. My brave girl, the queen whispered. You are so much stronger than you know. You carry the heart of Eldoria with you, and that will never change. Outside the salon windows, they could see crowds of people gathering along the palace gates. Word had spread throughout the kingdom that their beloved Princess Isabella was leaving that day. Flowers and small gifts were piled against the iron fence, and many people held signs with messages of love and safe travels. They came to say goodbye, King Harold observed, his voice thick with emotion. In 22 years, you have touched so many lives, Isabella. The children at the orphanage you visit every week, the families you helped during last winter's storms, the young women you taught to read at the village school. Isabella wiped her eyes and stood up to look out the window. The sight of her people, gathered to wish her well despite their own sadness, gave her a moment of strength. She waved to them through the glass, and a cheer rose from the crowd that could be heard even through the palace walls. I should go to them, she said. I should thank them properly. There is no time, King Harold said gently. The escort from Valeria will arrive within the hour. The reality of the timeline hit Isabella like a physical blow. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds. And then, she would leave everything she had ever known. Alexander stood and moved to the window beside his sister. Look, he said, pointing to a group of children at the front of the crowd. There is little Sarah from the village, and Thomas who helped in the stables last summer. They all came because you made them feel special, Isabella. You made them feel seen and valued. Isabella pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window. How do I say goodbye to all of this? How do I leave behind not just my family, but my purpose, my identity, everything that makes me who I am? You do not leave it behind, Queen Margaret said, joining them at the window. You carry it with you and plant it in new soil. You will bring the kindness and compassion of Eldoria to Valeria, and in doing so, you will create bridges between our kingdoms that are stronger than any political treaty. The clock in the corner of the salon chimed the half hour, and everyone in the room felt time slipping away like sand through their fingers. Isabella's departure was no longer a distant event they could pretend might not happen. It was rushing toward them with the inevitability of a storm. In just 30 minutes, the royal carriage would arrive to take Princess Isabella away from the only home she had ever known, toward an uncertain future in a foreign land. The palace was about to lose one of its brightest lights, and everyone could feel the approaching darkness. The sound of hoofbeats on cobblestones echoed through the palace courtyard like a death knell. Isabella's escort had arrived from Valeria, 12 mounted guards in deep purple uniforms, led by a stern-faced captain who dismounted and strode toward the palace entrance with military precision. Inside the royal chambers, Isabella's lady-in-waiting, Lady Catherine, was helping her into her traveling cloak. Catherine had served the princess for 8 years, since Isabella's 14th birthday, and the two had become closer than servant and mistress. They were true friends. Your Highness, Catherine whispered, her hands trembling as she fastened the silver clasp at Isabella's throat. I have packed your favorite books, your grandmother's pearl necklace, and the pressed flowers from last spring's garden party. Everything that might bring you comfort. Isabella turned to face Catherine, seeing her own fear reflected in her friend's eyes. You have been like a sister to me, Catherine, who will braid my hair and listen to my worries, who will laugh with me at silly jokes and help me choose which dress to wear for important occasions. The Princess of Valeria will find new friends, Catherine said, though her voice cracked with the effort of staying positive. You have such a gift for bringing out the best in people. Even in a foreign court, your kindness will attract those with good hearts. Through the chamber windows, they could see the courtyard filling with palace staff. Gardeners stood beside stable boys, kitchen maids next to senior advisors. Cook Mrs. Thornberry clutched a small wrapped package, undoubtedly Isabella's favorite ginger cookies for the journey. Old Sir Edmund, the royal tutor who had taught both Isabella and Alexander since childhood, leaned heavily on his walking stick, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Isabella took a deep breath and looked around her chamber one last time. The four-poster bed with its blue silk curtains where she had slept every night of her life. The writing desk by the window where she had penned letters to friends and composed her thoughts in her private journal. The bookshelf filled with well-loved volumes of poetry and adventure stories. The portrait of her grandmother, Queen Beatrice, whose wise eyes seemed to offer silent encouragement. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Alexander entered, no longer trying to hide his tears. He had changed into his formal uniform as crown prince, knowing that their goodbye would be witnessed by many and he needed to show strength for the kingdom. They are ready for you, he said simply. Isabella nodded and picked up her small traveling bag. Inside were the few personal items she could carry: letters from Alexander, a sketch Catherine had made of the palace gardens, a small vial of perfume that smelled like the roses from their mother's favorite garden, and the wooden toy horse their father had carved for her when she was 6 years old. Together, the siblings walked through the familiar corridors of the palace one last time, past the portraits of their ancestors who had ruled Eldoria for 300 years, past the grand staircase where they had slid down the banisters as children, much to their governess's horror, past the library where they had spent countless hours reading together on rainy afternoons. The great doors of the palace opened, and Isabella was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Every single member of the palace staff had gathered in the courtyard to bid her farewell. They formed 2 lines creating a path to the waiting carriage, and, as she walked between them, each person bowed or curtsied with obvious affection and respect. Mrs. Thornberry stepped forward with her package of cookies and a blessing for safe travels. Sir Edmund placed a small leather-bound book of poetry in her hands, saying it was from his private collection and had been his grandmother's favorite. The head gardener offered a cutting from Isabella's beloved rose bush, carefully wrapped and potted so she could plant it in Valeria. The kindness of these simple gestures overwhelmed Isabella. These people were not just servants, they were her extended family, and she was leaving them all behind. The captain of the Valerian escort approached and bowed formally. Your Royal Highness, I am Captain Aldrich. I have the honor of ensuring your safe journey to Valeria. King Edward and Queen Sophia eagerly await your arrival, as does Prince Marcus. Isabella curtsied gracefully in response, though her hands shook slightly. Thank you, Captain. I am ready. But she was not ready. How could anyone be ready to leave everything they loved? The carriage door stood open like the mouth of a beast waiting to devour her old life. The purple and gold banner of Valeria fluttered in the morning breeze, foreign and intimidating. Alexander stepped closer to his sister. Walk with me to the carriage, he said quietly. These last few steps we take together. Isabella slipped her arm through his, drawing strength from his presence. As they walked toward the ornate carriage that would carry her away from home, the assembled crowd fell silent. The only sounds were the jingling of harnesses, the shuffling of feet, and the soft crying of those who loved Princess Isabella and could not bear to see her go. At the carriage door, Isabella paused and turned back toward the palace. Its golden stone walls gleamed in the morning sunlight, looking more beautiful and beloved than ever before. This was the moment she had been dreading, the final goodbye that would change everything forever. King Harold and Queen Margaret approached their daughter at the carriage door. The king, usually so commanding and sure of himself, looked older than his 52 years. His decision to arrange this marriage had been made for the good of the kingdom, but seeing his beloved daughter's pain made him question everything. Isabella, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you may not understand now, but this union will prevent a war that could destroy thousands of lives. Your sacrifice will save countless families from the heartbreak we are feeling today. Isabella looked into her father's eyes and saw not just a king making difficult decisions, but a man torn between his duty to his kingdom and his love for his child. I understand, Papa, she said, using the childhood name she hadn't called him in years. I may not like it, But I understand. Queen Margaret stepped forward and removed a delicate chain from around her neck. Hanging from it was a small golden pendant shaped like a star, the symbol of the royal house of Eldoria. This has been worn by every queen of our family for 200 years, she said, fastening it around Isabella's neck. When you wear this, you carry our strength, our love, and our prayers with you. Isabella touched the warm gold against her skin and felt a surge of courage. She was not just Isabella anymore. She was the representative of generations of strong royal women who had faced their own challenges with grace and dignity. Alexander pulled a sealed letter from his jacket. This is for Prince Marcus, he said. I have told him what kind of person you are, your kindness, your intelligence, your sense of humor, your love for music and books and gardening. I have asked him to be worthy of you. The simple act of her brother defending her to her future husband brought fresh tears to Isabella's eyes. Even in her darkest moment, Alexander was trying to protect her. Captain Aldrich cleared his throat respectfully. Your Highness, we must depart now if we are to reach the first inn by nightfall. The moment everyone had been dreading was finally here. Isabella hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and rose water that always clung to the queen's hair. Take care of Alexander, she whispered. Make sure he does not work too hard trying to be the perfect prince. Remind him to laugh sometimes. Queen Margaret nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Isabella turned to her father and curtsied formally, but he pulled her into an embrace instead. I am so proud of you, he said. You are brave and gracious and strong. Valeria is fortunate to have you. Finally, Isabella faced Alexander, her brother, her best friend, her closest companion since childhood. How could she say goodbye to the person who knew her better than anyone else in the world? Promise me, she said, gripping his hands tightly, that you will write to me about everything. The harvest festivals, the summer fairs, the winter storms, the way the light falls on the mountains in autumn. I want to know about every day in Eldoria, even if I cannot be here to see it myself. I promise, Alexander said. And you must promise to tell me about Valeria, the good and the difficult. Do not pretend to be happy in your letters if you are not. I want to know how you truly are. Isabella nodded and kissed her brother's cheek. I love you, Alexander. That will never change, no matter how many miles separate us. I love you too, he replied. More than all the stars in the sky. Captain Aldrich stepped forward to help Isabella into the carriage. She settled onto the velvet cushions and looked out the window at her family one last time. Alexander stood between their parents, all three of them crying openly now that the formal farewells were over. The carriage lurched into motion, and Isabella pressed her face to the window to keep her family in sight as long as possible. The palace staff waved white handkerchiefs, and flowers thrown by the crowds outside the gates scattered across the cobblestones like colorful tears. As the carriage rolled through the palace gates, Isabella saw the people of Eldoria lining the streets. Children held up drawings they had made for her, women waved from their windows, and men removed their hats in respect. The love of her people surrounded her like a warm blanket, giving her strength even as her heart was breaking. The carriage picked up speed as they left the city behind and entered the countryside. Isabella watched through the rear window as the golden towers of Ravencrest Palace grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared behind the rolling hills. She was alone now, except for the Valerian guards and Captain Aldrich riding alongside the carriage. The familiar landscape of Eldoria stretched out on either side of the road. The farms where she had visited during harvest time, the villages where she had attended festivals, the forests where she and Alexander had ridden their horses on countless adventures. Inside the carriage, Isabella finally allowed herself to grieve properly. She cried for the childhood that was truly over, for the family she was leaving behind, for the uncertain future that lay ahead. She cried until there were no tears left, and then she sat in silence, watching her homeland roll past the carriage windows for what might be the last time. The palace behind her was indeed drowned in sorrow, but Isabella was beginning the long journey toward an unknown destiny that would test her courage, her wisdom, and her capacity to love in ways she could never have imagined. Back at Ravencrest Palace, the emptiness was overwhelming. Alexander stood in Isabella's chamber, now stripped of her personal belongings and feeling more like a museum than a bedroom. Lady Catherine was quietly folding the clothes Isabella had left behind, her tears falling silently onto the silk and velvet fabric. Queen Margaret wandered through the palace like a ghost, visiting all the places where Isabella had spent her time. The music room where she had practiced piano every morning, her fingers dancing across the keys while humming softly. The conservatory where she had tended her collection of exotic plants, talking to them as if they were old friends. The small balcony off her chamber where she had sat every evening to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. King Harold had shut himself in his study, staring at maps and treaties but unable to concentrate on anything except the image of his daughter's tearful face. The political necessity of the marriage made sense in his head, but his heart felt like it had been torn in half. He kept telling himself that Isabella would be happy in time, that she would grow to love Prince Marcus and find joy in her new role, but doubts gnawed at him like hungry wolves. The servants moved through their daily tasks with unusual quiet. The palace that had always hummed with cheerful conversation and laughter now felt muffled and gray. Mrs. Thornberry burned 3 batches of bread because she kept thinking about how Isabella used to sneak into the kitchen to steal warm rolls straight from the oven. The gardeners worked in silence, remembering how the princess used to join them in planting flowers, getting dirt under her fingernails, and laughing when they tried to tell her such work was beneath her station. Alexander tried to lose himself in his princely duties, but everything reminded him of Isabella. The weekly meetings with the village mayors, which Isabella had always attended to ask about the needs of the children and elderly. The review of applications for royal scholarships, which Isabella had helped evaluate because she believed education should be available to everyone, not just the wealthy. The planning of the Autumn Harvest Festival, which Isabella had coordinated for the past 5 years, bringing her special touch of warmth and inclusivity to every detail. As evening approached, Alexander found himself in the palace gardens, sitting beneath the old oak tree where he and Isabella had played as children. The tree was ancient and wise, its branches strong enough to hold tire swings, and brave enough to support 2 young royals who had climbed higher than they should have. Now Alexander sat alone beneath those same branches, holding the silver locket Isabella had given him, and feeling more lost than he ever had in his life. Sir Edmund approached slowly, his walking stick tapping against the stone pathway. The old tutor had taught the royal children for 15 years, watching them grow from mischievous youngsters into responsible adults. He had seen Alexander struggle with mathematics, and Isabella master languages with ease. He had watched them support each other through difficult lessons and celebrate each other's successes. "Your Highness," Sir Edmund said gently, settling onto the bench beside Alexander. "The princess would not want you to carry this grief alone." Alexander looked up at his old teacher. "How do I rule without her, Sir Edmund? Isabella was not just my sister. She was my conscience, my advisor, my closest friend. She helped me see solutions I could never find on my own. She reminded me to think about how our decisions would affect ordinary people, not just the nobles and politicians." Sir Edmund nodded thoughtfully. "Princess Isabella taught you well, but now you must trust that her lessons have become part of who you are. When you face difficult decisions, ask yourself what she would say. Her voice may be distant, but her wisdom remains with you." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Isabella's carriage continued its journey toward Valeria. They had stopped for the night at an inn in a small border town, and Isabella sat by the window in her room, looking out at stars that were the same ones that shone over Eldoria. She had written her first letter to Alexander, telling him about the countryside she had seen, the kindness of the innkeeper's wife who had brought her warm soup, and her hopes that Valeria might not be as foreign and frightening as she had imagined. Captain Aldrich had told her stories about Prince Marcus during dinner, how he had established schools for poor children, how he personally visited injured soldiers in the hospital, how he loved astronomy, and could name every constellation in the sky. These small details helped Isabella begin to see her future husband as a real person rather than just a political arrangement. She touched the golden star pendant at her throat and thought about her family. By now, Alexander would be missing their evening walk through the gardens. Her parents would be eating dinner in a dining room that felt too large and too quiet. Lady Catherine would be alone in the servants' quarters, probably crying into her pillow. But Isabella was beginning to understand that her grief, while real and valid, was not the end of her story. She was carrying the love and values of Eldoria to a new place, where she could plant them like seeds and watch them grow. Perhaps her marriage to Prince Marcus could create more than just peace between 2 kingdoms. Perhaps it could create understanding, friendship, and even love. The palace in Eldoria was indeed drowned in sorrow that night, its halls echoing with memories, and its rooms empty of Isabella's laughter. But sorrow, Isabella was learning, was not the opposite of hope. Sometimes it was the beginning of courage, the first step toward a future that might be different from what she had planned, but could still be beautiful in ways she had never imagined. As she fell asleep in the unfamiliar inn, Isabella dreamed of building bridges, not just between kingdoms, but between hearts. And, in her dreams, she was no longer the princess who had been sent away from home, but the woman who would bring two worlds together with grace, wisdom, and love.